Three, two, one. Please start. You are live.
Good evening, everyone. Greetings from Gastroenterology and Liver Forum. Hope all of you are doing well during these trying times. Most of the audience is conversant with the Gastroenterology Forum. Still, for the benefit of those who are connecting us with us for the first time, I would like to inform that our forum came into existence around 11 years back into 2010. And I am proud to share that with constant encouragement and blessings of the departments of hepatology and gastroenterology from PGI Chandigarh, Government Medical College Chandigarh, all the private practitioners, including the gastroenterologists of the Tri City, we are constantly involved in our endeavor to share the latest amongst the fraternity. Apart from the academic activities, our forum is always at the forefront of public awareness programs, be it obesity, colon cancer program, or hepatitis B or C. Recently, we launched a helpline for hepatitis B and C from our forum. Now, coming to today's webinar, we chose to discuss alcoholic liver disease. As we all know that globally, alcohol use disorder is the most common substance use disorder. And after smoking and hypertension, I think alcohol is the commonest preventable cause of death. And in India, still alcohol is the commonest cause of chronic liver disease and cirrhosis. Today, we have galaxy of experts amongst us who will be discussing the standard treatment protocols along with the recent advances, including regenerative therapy and liver transplantation in patients of alcoholic liver disease. It's my proud privilege to introduce Professor Anup Saraya, Head Department of Gastroenterology and Human Nutrition at AIIMS New Delhi. Professor Saraya needs no formal introduction. He has been a mentor to many of us. And apart from being a fine human being, he is a legendary figure in the field of gastroenterology. Sir's contribution to gastroenterology in general and specifically in the field of pancreas and nutrition is unparalleled. Sir, we are really honored to have you amongst us as one of our chairpersons. Thank you, sir. Now, over to Dr. Gurbalas to carry on the proceedings.
Thank you, Dr. Dhawan. I'm extremely thrilled to have Professor Varinder Singh, who is the head of department of Postgraduate Institute in Chandigarh, with us today as a moderator and a chairperson. Having been head of hepatology, he has done enormous work in the field of hepatology, especially in the chronic liver disease section. And his regenerative therapy has evolved a lot of interest and enthused many. Thank you very much for being with us this evening today, sir. And with this, I would like to hand over to the moderators so that they can introduce the speakers. Thank you, sir.
So I have to introduce?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So at the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Dhawan and Dr. Singh for inviting me for this important meeting. And it's my privilege to introduce a young budding hepatologist who has already made his mark in the field of hepatology, Dr. Nipun. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Hepatology at PGI, and I think he was a gold medalist at PGI. And he specializes in machine learning also. And we have seen few papers from him, and it will be a pleasure for all of us to listen from him the advances in the management of alcoholic hepatitis. So over to Nipun.
Thank you, sir. And at the outset, I would like to thank GLF and Dr. Saraya for a very kind introduction. So let me share my screen. So today my job here is today my job is to speak on the newer medical treatments in alcoholic liver disease. I bring greetings from PGIM Chandigarh. So outline of my talk would include why we need to study the alcoholic liver disease, what is the natural history of alcoholic liver disease, what is the pyro concept and how do we take this into account while managing the patients, and finally summarizing findings. We all know that Asia Pacific regions hold for more than more than half of population of world, and Asia Pacific region, the liver-related deaths, alcohol contributes to 28.8% of all deaths, and this is the second most common after the viral infections. Alcohol also contributes 22% of deaths among all chronic liver diseases related deaths and deaths related to liver cancer. And more so, these proportions are increasing over the period of time from 2000 to 2015. This is because the per capita alcohol abuse in adults more than 15 years of age is increasing. From 2000, it was 1.8 liters to 4.3 liters in 2010, and now it is 5.6 liters. And this is more problematic in patients with women also. So what is the natural history of alcoholic liver disease? Those patients or those persons who consume a significant amount of alcohol, they develop alcoholic fatty liver, which is the development of fat in the liver more than 5% of the liver parenchyma. More importantly, this fatty liver stage is reversible within 4 to 6 weeks of abstinence. But if patient continues to consume alcohol, around 30% of patients may progress on to develop steatohepatitis, which is development of inflammation and significant amount of liver damage in association with fatty liver. This stage can progress on to develop significant fibrosis in around 50% of patients. In around another 10 to 20% of patients, they progress on to develop cirrhosis characterized by portal hypertension, and then decompensation in around 20 to 40% of patients over the time. And around 10% of patients may develop hepatocellular carcinoma. What are the factors which affect the development of alcoholic liver disease? One always should remember that the amount of alcohol beyond 2 drinks in men and 1 drink in women are problematic, and they can cause alcoholic liver damage. Another interesting study which has come up from Mayo Clinic has shown that patients who have a BMI of more than 30, this cutoff applies to them. And if the BMI is less than 30, then the cutoff for drinks per day is 3 drinks in men and 2 drinks in women. But mind you, these are the cutoffs for liver disease, and no amount of alcohol is safe for cardiovascular and the neurological outcomes or the malignancies. Then the daily intake, whether the patient is binging, then binging has a 4-fold high risk of development of fatty liver disease and significant amount of liver disease. Cigarette smoking, women are more prone to develop alcoholic liver disease. More importantly, genetics are now playing a significant amount of role in predisposition to develop alcoholic liver disease. Increased BMI puts the patient at severity of ALD and development of severe grades of ACLF when they develop, and the mortality as well, which has recently been shown elegantly by Dr. Duseja from ARCS group. And the presence of comorbidities in terms of viral hepatitis, NAFLD, NASH, if coexistent, can increase the risk of severe amount of liver damage. Coffee consumption has been shown to associated with lower amount of alcoholic liver disease. Then the type of alcohol, wine consumption may have protective effect, but that is not yet proved in substantial amounts. And the moderate alcohol consumption in high BMI patients is still controversial, and it's not recommended. So out of the whole spectrum of alcoholic liver disease, we have alcoholic hepatitis, which is the most severe form and which amounts to 30 to 50% mortality in short term. We diagnose alcoholic hepatitis clinically when the patient is consuming alcohol in significant amounts, more than 40 grams in females and 60 grams in males, for more than 6 months with less than 60 days of abstinence, develops a jaundice with raised AST-ALT, with the AST-ALT ratio of more than 1.5, with both the values less than 400. And if it is present with other confounding factors, it is called possible alcoholic hepatitis. If these symptoms or signs are present alone without any confounding factors, these are called probable alcoholic hepatitis patients. For clinical trials and study purposes, probable alcoholic hepatitis is sufficient. But once there is a possible alcoholic hepatitis with confounding factors, one need to be confirm this diagnosis by biopsy, and it is characterized by hepatocyte ballooning, globular infiltration by neutrophils, and Mallory-Denk bodies. Mind you, the biopsy correlation is present only in 10 to 50% of the patients. And recent study from our institute, the half study we have presented in ASLD, there the correlation was significantly to the tune of more than 90% with clinical diagnosis. So anything else which we can do to predict or make the diagnosis of alcoholic hepatitis is the markers of cell death, which is the cytokeratin 18 fragment, which is M65. It is more than 2000. It makes the diagnosis of alcoholic hepatitis with an accuracy of 90%. So what are the current treatment options for the alcoholic hepatitis? We can have primordial prevention by just not drinking the alcohol, which is not pragmatic at most of the areas. Development of hepatic steatosis is reversible with nutrition, abstinence, and control of metabolic risk factors. Development of alcoholic hepatitis can be treated with steroids with or without NAC as per the current treatment options. Zinc is recommended, and along with the supportive treatment and liver transplant in very select group of patients. Development of cirrhosis, where we can manage these patients with management of their complications, infections, and finally liver transplantation. For hepatocellular carcinoma, it is largely restricted to as per the guidelines, resection, ablation, TACE, TARE, chemoimmunotherapy, or liver transplantation. So why do we need newer therapies in alcoholic hepatitis? These are the patients who have short-term mortality, more than 50%. Their long-term survival is dismal. They have a high frailty and morbidity and mortality. The abstinence alone is insufficient, and only 20% patients can improve on their own with nutrition and abstinence. Nutrition is critical but not practical to achieve in most of the patients. Corticosteroids are limited in terms of their response, that is, their effect lasts till 1 month. 40 to 50% patients are ineligible. But in our setup, most of the patients present with severe grades of alcoholic hepatitis, and they are largely ineligible for corticosteroids. 40 to 60% patients have unpredictable response to steroids. So we need newer therapies, and the newer targets includes the gut-liver axis, inflammation, oxidative stress, fibrosis, and liver regeneration. We know the pathogenesis of alcoholic hepatitis lies in broadly three different areas. One is the metabolism, one is the inflammation, and one is the gut. So there are different options of alcoholic hepatitis, which I would like to summarize in next slide with the use of PYRO model. So with the PYRO model, what this PYRO model suggests is that any patient who develops alcoholic liver disease has 4 key ingredients of its pathogenesis. One is predisposition, where person is predisposed to develop a liver disease by the terms of genetics. We can't do anything about it as of today. Metabolic syndrome, which we can control taking the account of nutrition and physical activity. Sarcopenia, we can improve taking adequate amount of nutrition, and extent of baseline damage and the immune failure. Then the injury, which can occur because of alcohol, infections, upper GI bleed, and herbal drugs or the DILI in these patients. And then subsequently, these injuries can lead on to systemic inflammation, cell death, poor liver regeneration, altered bile acid metabolism, and finally organ failures. So how do we approach each and everything with the newer therapies? I'll be taking you through those slides. For that, we should stratify these patients based on their severity. MDF is the classical age-old defining for severe alcoholic hepatitis, where MDF of more than 32 is being characterized as severe alcoholic hepatitis, where there is indication of corticosteroids. MELD has been classically used beyond more than 21 as a severe alcoholic hepatitis patients, and 11 to 20 are now classified as moderate alcoholic hepatitis. ABIC and GAHS score are not much validated, but the importance of GAHS score is there if it is more than 9 and MDF of more than 32, then we can sub-select a group of patients who will benefit from corticosteroids. And Lilly model is classically used for assessing the response to steroids at day 7. And there, if it is more than 4.45, it classifies the non-response, and we should stop the steroid in this group of patients. Now there is a histological severity scoring system also. I will not go through into just a small brief thing is that if there is a severe polymorphonuclear infiltration and mega mitochondria, that is a protective factor for severe alcoholic hepatitis. And these patients, if they are classified as severe according to the histology, they have a poor outcomes. So alcoholic hepatitis patients can have ACLF, and which we commonly encounter in our setup also. So why do we need to differentiate alcoholic hepatitis from ACLF? Because their outcomes, their response to treatment is altogether different. And there are different definitions of ACLF, we all know. So what is there to start in patients with alcoholic hepatitis if they develop ACLF? Their mortality is 72% in ACLF grade 3 compared to 58% in grade 2, 30% in grade 1, and 20% if they do not have ACLF. So it is very, very important to classify the patients with alcoholic hepatitis to have ACLF or not. And they are around 50% as per the European literature, it is 50%, but in our setup, it is close to 90% to 80% of patients who have ACLF at presentation, and 20% patients can have incident ACLF. And the most important predictor of incident ACLF is infections in them. And the predictors of death include the development of ACLF in alcoholic hepatitis patients. So what determines the progression of ACLF in patients with liver disease? It is the severity of acute decompensation, which we can classify based on the CLIF-C-AD score. And there are different metabolites which can also predict the development of severe alcoholic hepatitis. And more so, these are the metabolites related to the bacterial metabolism. Sarcopenia can also predict the development of ACLF in addition to cystatin C, and it also puts the patient at a high risk of mortality. So why are we reading all these things? Because we need to identify a subgroup of patients who are ACLF, who are going to develop ACLF. And there the treatment strategies will going to be different than patients with pure alcoholic hepatitis. You need to identify the different precipitants. Alcohol is the most common, and we know that abstinence improves the long-term outcome of patients. But if patient continue to take alcohol, the odds of death increases exponentially when the grams of intake exceeds more than 1 gram per day. So any amount of alcohol in a patient who develops alcoholic liver disease is dangerous. So all patients should be advised complete abstinence. And if they continue to take alcohol, there is increased risk of ascites, varices, hepatic encephalopathy, HCC, and death. Different drugs have been advocated for the alcohol use disorder, which is a topic in itself. But mind you, baclofen has been tested in patients with alcoholic liver disease in an RCT, which has been shown to prevent the abstinence. Importantly, there are certain drugs like gabapentin and topiramate, which are not metabolized by liver, can be used to prevent alcoholic use disorders. And now there is a data to suggest that if there is a combined therapy with the psychiatrist, then we can improve the long-term alcohol abstinence in these patients, as given by this systematic review. Nutrition improves the alcoholic hepatitis outcomes. And this is the age-old study by Mendenhall in 1995, where he showed that if the caloric intake reduces, and if it goes less than 1000 kilocalorie per day, the mortality reaches close to 90%. So patients who receive nutrition more than 21 kilocalorie per kg per day has an improvement in survival in alcoholic hepatitis patients. And this was also correlated well in a general medical admitted patients also, as published in Lancet 2019, where the protocolized nutrition was given to the patients, more than 1000 patients, and that had a significant improvement in survival of the patients. So adequate calories and protein in addition to vitamins like thiamine should be advocated in all patients with alcoholic hepatitis. Micronutrient deficiency should be repleted, and zinc has been shown to improve the gut integrity, should be provided in all patients with alcoholic hepatitis. Hepatic encephalopathy and fewer infections have been noted if the adequate nutrition was given. As per the EASL guidelines for cirrhotics and critically ill, first let us go to critically ill patients. We should consider sarcopenia and protein energy malnutrition in all patients. Calorimetry is advised but not available at all centers. The glucose control is mandated. Total energy expenditure in alcoholic hepatitis patients is very high. It is 32 kilocalorie per kg per day. So the energy requirement should meet 35 to 40 kilocalorie per kg That is the actual body weight per day. And the protein requirement are around 1.2 to 1.3 grams per kg. This is irrespective of their body weight. Whether obese, non-obese, all critically ill patients should be given adequate amount of calories. Patients with hepatic encephalopathy, oral branch chain amino acids are recommended. For patients with ALD cirrhosis or any cirrhosis, one should assess the degree of malnutrition in them and give the adequate amount of calories and protein with late evening snacks to prevent catabolism. Branch chain amino acids is recommended if the oral intake is poor. And for both of them, if oral nutrition cannot reach this amount of calories or proteins, one should go for RT tube feed in these patients. For patients who are obese, they are recommended to have a weight loss of 5 to 10% and hypocaloric feeding by less than 500 to 800 as per the recommendation. That much amount should be lesser, reduced from the adequate amount of calories which we are going to give into these patients. And micronutrients, vitamin D, calcium should be supplemented in patients. So whether nutrition or abstinence can improve the patients without any specific therapies in severe alcoholic hepatitis? Answer is yes. So there is a recent study from Batalla's group from Pittsburgh, where they have shown that if there is a significant fall in bilirubin within 7 days after admission of a severe alcoholic hepatitis patients, that is less than 0.8 times the baseline, these are the patients who are going to survive in 80% of the times. And the use of steroids is not beneficial in these group of patients. So 7 days are mandated that these patients should be monitored very, very carefully over the first 7 days. Different treatment options include prednisolone. As I told before, that majority of patients are not applicable in our setup because of infections and the very high disease severity. The pathophysiologically, it reduces the inflammatory damage to the liver and reduces the BAMs and reduces the DAMs. But the problem lies with the fact that they are contraindicated in patients with, and that are the relative contraindications, the infections, renal failure, upper GI bleed, and the multi-organ failure and shock, they are generally not given. Pentoxifylline is a non-selective phosphodiesterase inhibitor, improves the HRS, and initial study in gastroenterology 2001 showed that data. And it inhibits the chemokine and the cytokine synthesis, decrease the neutrophil activation, decrease the proliferation of lymphocyte, but I will be coming to the data, but that is not currently recommended. Glutathione not recommended. SAM, no evidence in support or refute by systematic recent Cochrane review, but there was a reduction in the alcohol use disorder in patients who were taking SAM. Metadoxin, there was a small study of 33 patients which showed that addition of metadoxin to pentoxifylline could, or steroids could improve the response rate in terms of survival. Other therapies are not beneficial in terms of their survival as well as clinical outcome. Extracorporeal liver devices, there is no survival benefit, but there was a small benefit in patients who had a MELD of less than 28. This was a recent systematic review which showed that corticosteroids improves the 1 month survival in the patients, and that includes the classical landmark trial, which is the STOPA trial as well. And that showed that there is an improvement in 1 month survival with the use of corticosteroids in post hoc analysis, but that was limited to 1 month only. As compared to pentoxifylline, corticosteroids were not beneficial, and addition of pentoxifylline was also not beneficial, and pentoxifylline alone as compared to control was also not beneficial in terms of survival. This network meta-analysis compares both the direct and indirect evidence and synthesizes a network estimate which tells you that which therapy is superior over the other. And then in this study, they showed that corticosteroids, if NAC, intravenous NAC in the ALF dose is added to these patients, can improve 1 month survival. And it was, this survival benefit was there when compared to no intervention, when compared to NAC alone, and when compared to corticosteroid alone. So combination fared better. So therefore, the ASLD guidelines now recommend starting prednisolone 40 milligram per day with or without intravenous N-acetylcysteine, an enteral nutrition of more than 21 kilocalorie per kg in patients with severe alcoholic hepatitis. Mind you, you need to rule out uncontrolled infections with AKI, upper GI bleed, concomitant viral infections, tuberculosis, and multi-organ failures and shock before giving steroids to these patients. But most of our patients fall into this category, and largely they are ineligible for steroids. And if you give steroids to them, start with 40 milligram per day of prednisolone or equivalent, and then see the Lille model at day 7. If it is more than 0.45, you stop this prednisolone. Otherwise, you continue it for 28 days, and there is a limited benefit. And there is another study which classified the Lille response to partial, null, or complete responders. So is there something where we can predict that these are the patients who will not respond to steroids? And answer is yes. So this is again the Mendenhall study in 1995, which showed that MDF score of more than 54 if given steroids had a high mortality compared to patients who had a lesser MDF scores. And in ESLD guidelines, they recommend that MDF of 90 and MELD of 30 have a very high severe disease severity, and they should be carefully assessed for infections and other contraindications before starting corticosteroids. There are recent findings which suggest that if there is a cytokeratin 18 marker, which is a M30, which is a necrosis marker, if it is more than 5, then only the steroids will be responsive. Otherwise, the steroids will not improve the survival. Development of ACLF will reduce the response to steroids. If there is no ACLF, the response to steroids would be 72%, and which drops down to 8% if there is a development of ACLF in patients with alcoholic hepatitis. And mind you, the definition of ACLF here is the EASL definition with multi-organ failures. Another study showed the NLR ratio. If it is 5 to 8, then the steroids will be responsive. That is, there will be a survival benefit. And if it is more than 8, then it will not be responsive. Another in-depth studies are there which shows that urinary metabolites, acetyl-carnitine, can predict the response to steroids. If it is high, then patients may not be responsive to steroids. Another study from ILBS showed that if there are poor liver regeneration genes markers, then these patients will not respond to steroids. Adenosine methionine, as I previously told, there is no clear evidence, although there is one study which showed that the response rate to steroids was higher if it was added to steroids, and the HRS was reduced. There was 0% of HRS in patients who received steroids with Heptral, which is the SAME. But Cochrane review finally concluded that in 9 RCTs, there was no benefit in terms of survival.
Nipun, you have to be a little faster because it is already 10 minutes over.
So I'll be taking you through in next 2 minutes. I'll be completing the newer
Go
therapy.
ahead.
So early antibiotic therapy improves the survival, and this is the recent paper by Payano et al. Which showed that if given antibiotics within 3 hours, and appropriate antibiotics will improve the survival of patients with acute decompensation of cirrhosis. Gut dysbiosis is commonly seen in patients with alcoholic hepatitis, starting from the oral cavity, duodenum, ileum, and colon. And there is a lot of dysbiosis in terms of increase in Enterobacteriaceae, decrease in lactospiraceae, increase in Streptococci enterobacteriaceae. We can modulate the gut using probiotic, prebiotics, FMT, and then different bioengineered bacteria. In this study by FMT, by Abby Phillips, he showed that FMT improved the survival in around 16 patients as compared to corticosteroids and pentoxifylline. Along with that, there was an improvement in HE, ammonia, AKI, and MELD scores. In patients, 8 patients, he also showed the actuarial survival at 1 year. So short-term survival was better with FMT, and as well as the long-term survival was better. But these are the small-scale studies, and larger studies are needed. We had some experience with Dr. Bhiman, who did this study and showed significantly better 1-month survival in patients who received FMT, 13 patients. Probiotics have been used in many studies, but no significant improvement in survival of these patients. And they showed just the improvement in the biochemical liver functions only. There is a newer therapy targeting Enterococcus faecalis cytolysine, which can cause damage to the hepatocytes and can lead to death in these patients. So if cytolysine was deleted from Enterococcus faecalis, the survival was better. And if phages were used against Enterococcus faecalis, then again the survival was better and liver damage was better, lower. Upper GI bleed can add on to the liver injury in alcoholic liver diseases. Therein, if patients have ACLF with acute variceal bleed, then you can go ahead with the preemptive tips, and there you can reduce the mortality of these patients. And Bavino recommends the patients with child B cirrhosis with active bleeding and child C cirrhosis with active bleeding to undergo preemptive tips to improve their survival. So these are the findings in applicable to ALD cirrhotic patients. To target the response, we have various cytokines. Interleukin-1 beta is the significant one, and interleukin-1 receptor antagonist was used in this study, which is anakinra, and compared to prednisolone, it was from Zabo's group, and it showed no difference in the survival. Another study is ongoing. Interleukin-22 is a epithelial-derived cytokine. It can improve liver regeneration and antibacterial defense. And there in this study by Dr. Shah's group had shown that 9 patients were given fusion protein, which is interleukin-22 with the IgG2. They showed that in addition to steroids, this protein helped them better, and their survivals were better, and their liver response was better. LPS and TLR4 are involved in the pathogenesis of ALD and alcoholic hepatitis, and there are different mouse studies which showed that if you target LPS or TLR4 using TAC242, which is from Dr. Jalan's group, shows the improvement in coma-free survival and improvement in cell death. Then you can improve the liver functions in mouse models by targeting necroptosis using necrostatin-1. GCSF is a pleiotropic hormone cytokine which can act on multiple immune cells to favor the liver histology. It can activate the progenitor cells to cause liver regeneration. It can promote the endothelial progenitor cells to cause the reduce in portal hypertension. And there is an initial study from Dr. Sarin's group in ACLF where they showed significantly improved survival, but was not replicated in European studies. My mentor, Dr. Virender Singh, showed that there was a significantly improved survival in patients who received in patients with alcoholic hepatitis if they received GCSF for 5 days. That was a dose 300 microgram BD for 5 days. And then also he showed that if there was an addition to pentoxifylline, there was the addition to NAC, there was no improvement, additional benefit of NAC. This systematic review showed that the benefit of GCSF was primarily seen in Asian studies compared to European studies. Mesenchymal stem cell therapy has also shown improvement in survival. And this systematic review concluded that stem cell therapy can improve survival in patients with alcoholic liver diseases. Obeticholic acid can be used, and this trial is ongoing, and the recent data showed that there can be an improvement in MELD score by 3 or 6 and 4.5 times. Units in patients with alcoholic hepatitis who were given OCA. And another study by Dur 928, which is still under pipeline. There are different ongoing trials. FMT, omega-3 fatty acid is another trial by LBS where they showed significantly improved survival with omega-3 fatty acid when given to the ICU patients with alcoholic hepatitis. Organ failure, standard of care, there's nothing extra to add here. Artificial liver support devices not proven to have a significant amount of survival benefit. Just they improve the bilirubin as well as the HE in patients with severe liver disease. Plasma exchange is one of the important treatment strategies which has shown in this systematic review that it improves survival in patients with alcoholic hepatitis. And we have some experience of around 28 patients where we have showed the significant improvement in bilirubin, ammonia, and the improvement in protein levels. And the disease severity score.
Dr. Nipun, can you conclude it now? Because this is already 20 minutes more.
So finally, the definitive therapy is liver transplantation. And this is the ARC where they suggested that if the ARC score is less than 10, then you can add regenerative therapies in these patients. Finally, to conclude, ALD, including alcoholic hepatitis, contributes significantly to the liver-related deaths and high burden. Nutrition Abstinence and supportive treatment are the key treatment options. Infections, AKI, high MELD score, and MDF precludes corticosteroids for alcoholic hepatitis in many setups across India. Plasmapheresis, interleukin 22, TAC242, which is FMT and GCSF are the potential new therapeutic options. AOD management has to be done in all patients, and liver transplantation is a definite treatment, must be explored in all patients. Thank you very much, and I regret for the long.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nipun, for an exhaustive review of the topic. We'll have the questions and answers in the last. And now I invite Dr. Sanjeev Sehgal, who is a principal director at the Max Saket Hospital. He's a liver transplant hepatologist, and he has been involved with this from the very beginning of his career. And there is a long list of his training and the awards. Without wasting time, I'll be just requesting Dr. Sanjeev Sehgal for the role of liver transplant in these patients with ALD. Dr. Sanjeev, please.
Thank you, Dr. Virender Singh. I must thank Dr. Sandeep Dhawan and the forum for inviting me for this session today. I will try and share my slides. Right. So after this exhaustive medical review which we just heard, my job is actually to specifically mention about what we understand by liver transplantation in alcoholic liver disease and how it is going to impact our management now and in future. So as I speak, let me tell you, we must understand what is the burden of alcoholic liver disease in any liver transplant center, maybe in India or in the West. There are a lot of controversies when we consider liver transplant in alcoholic liver diseases, particularly alcoholic hepatitis. And there are unique challenges in these patients when they are transplanted. And as a hepatologist, I think we need to understand all these. This is not a surgical domain only. It's actually a hugely medical domain, and all hepatologists who are getting trained today must understand the dynamics of these minute and accurate things which can really change the outcome of a patient. When and whom to transplant? Is there a difference between medical management and liver transplant in a patient who's sick? What is the outcome of liver transplant in alcoholic liver disease, alcoholic hepatitis, and then try and summarize, how we can benefit from what the knowledge which we have. Now, considering the time which is limited, I'll be brief in my presentation today and try to speak about the important practical aspects of this important topic. Now, if you look at this, the burden of alcoholic liver disease in a transplant program actually is huge. This is a data from the European registry, and you'll find that these white bars here, they indicate the burden of alcoholic liver disease which is increasing, and the deep blue bars are the virus-related cirrhosis. In fact, these viral-related cirrhosis actually are decreasing over time. So ALD is really a huge burden in European setup, and outcome is about 80 to 85% survival at 1 year, which is similar to that seen after transplantation for other etiologies. Now, what happens in US? In this registry from the UNOS database, again this red bar here is the alcoholic liver disease, and you'll find that this again in the last few years it has been increasing, and this is till 2016, and this is steadily increasing over time. And as we have excellent drugs for hepatitis C, antivirals and all, the viral etiologies are again coming down, and the ones which are really prominent are the alcoholics and the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is NASH is equally important as an indicator of transplant. Now, I've taken this data from burden of ALD and liver transplant program in North India. This is my experience in Vedanta when we were there, and believe me, 20% of patients who are transplanted were actually because of alcoholic liver disease. So it's a huge burden. Now this hepatitis C is now coming down and NAFLD is increasing, but alcoholics, they generally contribute to about 20 to 25% of all patients who are undergoing liver transplant. So this is a huge burden. Now, what sort of patients need transplantation in alcoholic liver diseases? Now there are some general indications which are true to all diseases. All cirrhotics will have similar indications like recurrent and severe hepatic encephalopathy, refractory ascites, SBP, recurrent portal bleeding, malnutrition, development of hepatorenal syndrome, hepatopulmonary syndrome, HCC. Anybody with MELD more than 14, CTP late B or C should be on list for liver transplantation if you've got alcoholic cirrhosis. So these are actually not different from other cause of cirrhosis. But what is really interesting, what I want to emphasize today is that liver transplant in alcoholics is shrouded with controversy and it really evokes strong emotions. Why this is being done, why this alcoholic is being given an organ. This is especially true in when you are having a DDLT setup in organ donation program. This is a problem, huge problem in the West actually. And why severe alcoholic hepatitis patients are actually denied liver transplant, and if you do a transplant, what is the outcome? So I will in the next few slides first speak about alcoholic hepatitis, which is a huge problem. We see this day in and day out. These patients, especially in northern part of the country, the alcoholics are coming to us heavily drinking, and these are often denied transplant. Why? Because there's a risk of alcoholic relapse, there's an issue of abstinence. If you stop the alcohol, they may actually improve spontaneously, and also there is a negative impact of transplant if alcoholic hepatitis patients are considered for transplantation. This is especially true for DDLT programs, and also that there is some sort of bias that alcoholic liver damage is a personal responsibility of the patient, and he has really not been careful and he has gone into it. So there is a balance which you can tilt in either way. There is a group of doctors who say no, it should not be done, it's a self-inflicted disease, there's the risk of abstinence problem, they will relapse again, and if they stop alcohol they might have improved spontaneously. And there is a group of doctors who are in favor of transplant for alcoholics. This is especially true in living donor liver transplantation. There is young patients, they have a good response to transplant, and there are many other self-inflicted diseases where you don't really consider these. So this has been debated on and off, arguments for transplanting alcoholic hepatitis, argument against transplantation alcoholic hepatitis. Most of these are a very social issue as well, like abstinence rule. Now your patient must be committed to actually abstain. A, it will improve the liver, and B, if you do a transplant and patient is sick and he has done well after transplant, it is believed that longer the duration of abstinence, the less maybe the chance of this patient actually going back to alcohol. But this is not all true. I'll show you how. A negative public perception, I just mentioned. A self-inflicted problem in alcoholics, I just mentioned. And there is a belief that once you have a lot of patients in your cohort who are getting transplanted, like we did for the 400-500 transplants for alcoholic liver disease, and of these patients, if you have about 20%, 30% going back to alcohol, so you're going to have a huge problem with a new group of patients, a new disease which is happening, which is post-transplant alcohol relapse, graft dysfunction, and they are then very difficult to manage. So this is a very, practical, cartoon, which one should all understand, that when you consider these patients for transplant, if at all, then it's not a straightforward thing. There is a very well defined way when you select these patients. They must have excellent psychosocial support. It should be the first episode of decomposition. They should have not responded to steroids, so they're non-responders, and they should agree to maintain lifelong alcohol abstinence. And there is these are different circles, different specialist rings which are involved: nurses, specialists, hepatologists, surgeons, and anesthetists. So all of them should have seen this patient, and then the patient would have come to a transplant program and with an outcome with that. Let me tell you, the problem in alcoholics when they have a transplant is not the outcome. Believe me, the immediate outcome, survival, our surgeons are excellent these days, our management is excellent, and I'll show you that actually we can tide over these patients reasonably well. But the problem of recidivism is there, so they go back to alcohol. Now this definition of recidivism is also different in different studies. Like I would have taken, or I still take, that any alcohol consumption after transplant which is called a slip is considered as a recidivism. Some have different criteria, like more than 2 drinks or 3 drinks per week, each drink more than 30 grams and so on. But nevertheless, the rate of recidivism, if you see here, which we showed about 10% in our paper which we published in 2014, is as high as 52% in a study from France. So the recidivism rate can vary from 10 to 50%. Again, it is my experience and my feeling that in living donor programs, because the donor is often a very close member, usually a wife to husband, or a, son to husband, and so on, father, and so on. And family support is very strong. Indians don't have nuclear families; they have this huge joint families. So the chance of this patient going to alcohol may be a little less. Whereas in Western population, DDLT organ comes. I mean, their social support may be very good, but the individual support at level of house may not be that strong, and there is some dispute in this. But nevertheless, the recidivism rate perhaps may be higher in the Western population than in Indian population. Now, this is typically for alcoholic hepatitis. The previous slide was for ALD in general, alcoholic cirrhosis, but for alcoholic hepatitis, where the numbers are small, like this Patrick Mathurin was 26 patients who were transplanted, relapse of 15%, 17 patients, 9 patients. Our own paper which we published in alcohol, which was 2 years back, I'll start to discuss this paper in my later part of the discussion. We had about 13% was the relapse rate. So the relapse rate again will vary, but if you look at the result, reasonably good results from 70-80% survival at 6 months to almost a good even longer term survivals, which I would show in my studies later on. So this is something which one should understand. But what you also notice that most of these top studies are DDLT, and only this one is LDLT in this paper which I am presented here. So abstinence, we have understood what are the issues. One is an abstinence period of 6 months does not predict post-transplant sobriety with a very good accuracy, and sick patients who are having severe alcoholic hepatitis may not wait longer for the abstinence period to really happen, and you may lose them. So therefore, this 6 months period is really no more followed strongly in most programs. But we must understand what are the predictors of relapse when you transplant a patient of alcohol-related liver problem. This is both for living donor transplant and for DDLT. What are the predictors of relapse? We looked into it also, and then we made a review of this thing in one of our publications. Absence of structured program, length of sobriety. If a shorter duration of being sober, probably higher risk of relapse, but this is not entirely true. Other substance abuse, if the patient is taking other drugs, marijuana, cannabis and all, they are likely to go back to alcohol after transplant, and they should not be transplanted. Please note, other drug abuse, if it is there with alcohol, these patients should not be transplanted. Lack of social support, younger age at transplant, active smoking, criminal history, and history of complications post-transplant. If some alcoholic patient who has had a good transplant unfortunately develops complications 6 months or 1 year down the line, they somehow lose faith in the transplant. They lose faith in the doctors, in the program. If they develop rejection, graft dysfunction, and then they think that, oh my, let me go back to alcohol, and that is a very important cause I've seen in my own personal experience. So what is really challenging? These patients who are undergoing transplantation with severe alcoholic hepatitis, they are unique. They have multi-organ involvement, they have sepsis, renal dysfunction, both pre and post-op. They need dialytic support, they may have alcoholic cardiomyopathy, they may have marked motillar hypertension, severe coagulopathy, severe malnutrition, organic brain damage sometimes. If you do a brain scan, you might find cerebral atrophy, you might find subdural hematomas, and they have a poor psychosocial assessment in general because they are sick. You cannot really assess them psychosocially. So we are dealing with a very sick patient with very high peri and post-op morbidity. So that is the group of patients we are considering for transplantation if you are going to do a transplant for a severe alcoholic hepatitis. So you can understand how bad this patient is. And if you look at what the experience had been over the last 1 decade, the study by French study by Mathurin, which is the first quoted study, 26 patients, and they showed that transplant versus non-transplant in the matched control, survival was 71% versus 23%. And this is a study from Mount Sinai, 111 patients with severe alcoholic hepatitis, transplant versus no transplant. The early liver transplant, it was 89% survival versus matched control was only 11% survival. So both of these studies clearly showed that there is a difference in outcome. And then we have this accelerated alcoholic hepatitis trial, which is again a US trial with 8 centers in them. Early transplant without any sober period actually led to a survival of about 94% 1 year, 84% 3 years, and alcohol abuse post-transplant 10% 1 year, 17% 3 year. It's a good study, and it does mention that okay, if you do a transplant, you may go out with a good, come out with a good outcome, and without a transplant, your mortality is 70% at 6 months. So now let me try and tell you what is our own experience from India. This is important to understand. So we showed a good outcome of liver-to-liver transplantation for severe alcoholic hepatitis, not responding to medical management. And in this, 39 patients were selected who are biopsy-proven clinical alcoholic hepatitis. It's a retrospective data from the explant which was studied later on. Total alcoholic patients who are having ALD were 50. Of 500, of this 500, 39 had explant biopsy-proven alcoholic hepatitis and had clinical features to support that. So these patients, 39 versus 461, were compared. The alcoholic hepatitis were younger, they had higher child score, higher MELD score, they had more infections, and these are some of the complications post-transplant. Only to point to mention here was that alcohol relapse was at 13% overall, of which 2, which is 8%, had harmful drinking pattern and had severe graft dysfunction post-transplant. However, the overall outcome between these 39 patients with alcoholic hepatitis and 461 with alcoholic cirrhosis was almost similar. So you can really have fairly good outcome in these patients, and that's something interesting. Now, this has been mentioned again and again, and we all understand this, that in ACLF, which is the broad definition we are dealing these days, it's a EPASL or EASL or American. Everybody loves to use that ACLF definition may vary, but bottom line is that in these patients, at least in my own experience, 50% of patients of ACLF have chronic disease, chronic component as alcohol, and acute component which has led to worsening of ACLF is there in about 1/3 of patients. This is very, very important. Now, we had this review which we analyzed everything a few years back in alcohol liver-related liver disease. What is that really which we understand? We understand that 6-month abstinence is based on small, poor quality data. Several studies have not found an association between abstinence and relapse. So 6 months probably does not hold to that strongly, and some people have come down to 3 months. I'll show the Italian data for this. And also sick patients with ACLF with severe alcoholic hepatitis, majority will not really survive for 6 months. So 6 months waiting in these patients is probably of no use. Now, if you are in an LDLT program like in one of the centers where I'm working, in North especially, and you have to plan a exceptional case of transplant of alcoholic hepatitis, somebody with DF32 more, MELD more than 21, your patient has failed intensive medical management, steroids, pentoxifylline, what you call as non-responder to medical therapy. You look at a prospective donor, logistics, finances, related donor, definitely multi-step psychiatric evaluation as far as possible, rapid workup of donor recipient, legal committee, and LDLT. This is a very, very complicated thing, but it has to be extremely well orchestrated. It has to go very smooth. Only then you can have an outcome which is good. In my last few slides, I'll just mention about what is the practice. Now, this is an excellent study from Italian Consortium on Alcoholic Liver Disease, which was published way back in 2014, and I still like this group of Italian region. They said that if alcohol-related liver disease and end-stage liver disease MELD was less than 19, wait for abstinence for more than 6 months. Patient is stable. If you have end-stage liver disease, MELD is more than 19. First was MELD less than 19. This is MELD more than 19. The patient is sick, so you can really go with an abstinence of 3 months, which is acceptable, and don't wait for 6 months. And if you have this third group, severe alcoholic hepatitis, MELD more than 21, DF more than 32, here patients are very sick, and you can go ahead with liver transplant independent of abstinence period in highly selected patients. This is a very practical approach to my mind. The EASL guidelines actually were again very good, and I will just mention some few important points. So liver transplant can be considered in ALD patients classified as Child-Pugh C, MELD more than 15, because it confers a survival benefit. Selection should not be based on 6-month abstinence period alone. There should be favorable addiction and psychological profile. Please note, there should be an integration of an addiction specialist in the entire program. There should be psychologists and addiction specialists as a part of multidisciplinary approach, very important. An early liver transplant should be proposed to a minority of patients only with severe acute hepatitis who have not responded to medical therapy after careful selection process. So this is probably my last slide. So as I'm mentioning, please note that I have mentioned on several occasions that you can do a transplant for severe alcoholic hepatitis. But please don't go with the message that this is right. No, this is not right. In most patients, I would, and I still don't tell transplant. I don't tell transplant because they are not good patients. They are very sick patients, and the relapse rate is there. And there are a lot of issues with somebody is drinking alcohol, has not abstained, and you're going to do a transplant. So that's not the message. But on a very highly selected, on a protocol basis, if you're a very matured program, you can take a case like that. And if you're doing LDLT, you can have a family-related donor, which has to be first relative as far as possible. So this message should be taken very carefully, and it should not be generalized. Now, this algorithm is very simple and practical. I had this, a partial algorithm with Nipun presented. This is again a very simple algorithm. If you have alcoholic hepatitis patient, look at the patient's diagnosis, make sure that diagnosis is correct. If there's a doubt, you can do a transjugular biopsy and screen for infections. Make sure that patient is managed very well medically. Look for disease severity scores, whatever is in your practice, in your setup. Most would use MDF or GHS, and if the MDS is more than 32, you say it's severe alcoholic hepatitis. Less than 32, give specific, just non-specific medical supportive care. More than 32 DF, although prednisolone is written here, in my experience, I am not able to give steroids to most of my patients because of infections which they have. But nevertheless, that's a approach. And you just heard from Nipun also that if your patient has responded, it's fine. Less than 0.45 Lilly score, you can continue medical treatment. Non-responder to medical treatment, you can consider for transplant in highly selected patients. So, my dear friends, in my final slide, I have to mention that alcohol liver disease is a major indication of liver transplant in India as in the West, and accounts for nearly 1/5 of all liver transplants which we do. Those with severe alcoholic hepatitis, non-responsive to steroids, may not survive for 6 months. Only 25% actually they survive 6 months. And in these patients, you can actually, in a very careful manner, in a very mature program, advise for transplant with a good outcome. There is a risk of recidivism. You must understand a multidisciplinary team should be there, and an integrated addiction specialist or psychologist, because the recidivism rate can vary from 10 to 50% in these patients. Luckily, in our own setup, it's not so high. There should be favorable addiction and psychology profile of these patients as far as possible, although it's sometimes very tough to actually assess them. And please note that post-transplant survival outcome overall in the long run for liver transplant in alcohol liver disease, their outcomes are almost similar to that seen in other etiologies. So with that, I'll come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much once again, and I'll be delighted to take up any questions if they are there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjeev, for a nice presentation, telling mainly the practical issues involved in the liver transplant, in the alcoholic liver disease and alcoholic hepatitis. These are very difficult patients. Now we can have the questions and answers. Before we start the various questions, Dr. Sanjeev.
Yes.
Yeah. The major problem which we face is the very high MDF, especially in alcoholic hepatitis, and the sepsis. How deep you should investigate the patients for the origin of sepsis. That is a big problem, because you can do all the routine tests. In spite of that, there are some patients who are still harboring the infection, and it is very risky to subject them for the liver transplant.
That's an excellent question, Professor Singh, and I completely agree with you. This is something which, even when I leave the hospital, go to my room, I think, oh my God, something must be harboring there. And you are so right in this. We make all efforts to do infection screen. We do the blood culture, urine culture. I do procalcitonin. I do their inflammatory markers. And I've seen that probably the experience in PGI also is the same. I was there, long time back. There's a high risk of fungal infection in these patients, especially when I do transplant. Besides the usual, gram-negative sepsis and all, they also have more fungal sepsis later on. So we do try to screen as far far as possible, do the ascitic tap for cultures, everything we do. And I surely put them on antibiotics early on the course and involve my infection disease specialist as far as possible. And whenever there's a doubt, I try to reculture. I try to recheck my antibiotic protocol, and I am always at my you can say the lowest threshold to change my strategy, because infection is the most important cause of morbidity and mortality if you are subjecting them to transplantation.
Yeah. So we can have the questions in the chat. There are not many questions. There is a question from Dr. Akash from Lucknow. He has been our student and he has just commented the need for the stratification based on the FDF and MELD instead of taking binary cutoffs. Dr. Nipun, you want to respond?
Yeah. So thank you, Akash, for mentioning this point. There is a graded severity of these patients with alcoholic hepatitis. So the patients start with a mild disease and they can progress on to severe disease. So MDF tells you the liver functions, and the MELD in addition tells you the creatinine, which is the extrahepatic organ failure. So basically there is a continuum. So MELD less than 10, there are mild cases. 11 to 20, they are the moderate cases, and the more than 20, they are the severe cases. And you can use the dynamicity of these scores. Like say one study which showed that MELD score improvement by the 2 points within 7 days of admission was a predictor of improvement in survival. So these are the patients which you can just monitor the patients. And another Dr. Ramon Batalar has recently shown the rapid followers. There is a big decrease in bilirubin. These are the patients who are going to survive. So dynamicity of scores are very, very important in predicting the outcomes. First. Second, development of ACLF in these group of patients, either by APASL definition or by EASL definition. Either of them will lead to poor outcomes and poor response to any therapies whatsoever. So patients broadly, if have a MELD of more than 30, development of ACLF grade 3 by any scoring systems, these are the patients, they should be straight away, I would say straight away counseled if they are appropriate for the liver transplantation, because these are the patients who are not going to make it. If they are fitting the criteria for liver transplantation, that is, if they are suitable, they should be counseled about that and ruling out infections and all other things.
Yeah, there is another from Dr. Akash Roy only, the need for addressing the heterogeneity in the experimental trials based upon the pure alcoholic hepatitis and ACLF, which becomes a problem in research-based referral institutes. They are most fit into ACLF.
Very true, sir.
Yeah. So then there is a question from Dr. Prateek Delhi. How criminal history are predictors of relapse post-LT? Dr. Sanjeev.
Well, I think probably when this is included in that relapse indicators, it perhaps indicates that those who are actually entering as criminals, probably they are not compliant in their social behaviors. They are less likely to be following the social norms, and they're less likely to be compliant to doctors' advices. Perhaps this may be the reason. Probably an association of factors which make them less socially acceptable. There's probably bias in this statement. I don't want to say that criminals cannot be made and they cannot be you can say reformed, but I don't know, that's what it probably means.
This is from Dr. Ajay Duseda, and he says that preliminary data on the carbative and the dialib by Dr. Rajiv Jalan group looks promising. Dr. Nipun, you want to have any comment on this?
So yeah, recently they have come up, the A-Liver Consortium by Dr. Jalan's group have shown phase 2 results from this dialyze, which is very novel system of dialysis, liver dialysis, where it can remove the damaged albumin, in addition to the cell death markers and the lipopolysaccharide and the harmful cytokines in these patients, there they have shown significantly better liver functions, and long-term results are waiting.
Another question from Dr. Ajay Duseja. Obesity and ALD is quite common in this part of the country. How do you handle this combination for liver transplantation? This is to Dr. Sanjeev.
Hello, Ajay. Well, Ajay has brought up obesity in this discussion, which is, I think, an exciting thing. And I've actually started using this definition that there is a combination of, NAFLD and NASH and alcoholic steatohepatitis, which is their problem. So it is sometimes not easy to just label somebody as alcoholic hepatitis, especially if they're obese and all. The component of obesity could actually be contributing to their liver dysfunction to a large extent. We know that of all patients who drink alcohol, only 10-20% actually have liver problem. Not everybody has that. So similarly, somebody having morbid BMI 37-38 is obese, they could be having a liver problem because of NASH itself. So I think Dr. Ajay has very rightly put that this is not a very straightforward thing to do. Probably good quality explant histology will only tell me which was a dominant factor. Of course, ongoing history of alcohol will make ALD a contributor to the diagnosis. I will not change. It will be always be there. We do label that ALD plus NAFLD, that we have started labeling in some patients. So that's the way I will look into it.
Dr. Sanjeev, there is regarding these patients with the alcoholic hepatitis which you did the transplant, you didn't have the control group, and all these are open label studies. So how do you react to this? Because there is a lot of bias in this, and not only the liver transplant, I will say all the studies which I did, even with the regenerative therapies, with the GCSF and GCSF and NAC, I feel that these are all open label studies. So unless we have the double blind trial, we will be biased in interpreting the results. So what do you say?
Yeah, Professor Singh, I think you're very, very right. We all agree. In fact, this was a huge, you can say, criticism to the NEGM study also, because what people have done, they have used matched control. Both the Mount Sinai study of 111 patients, NEGM 26 patients. So what they do a very small segment of their population of alcohol hepatitis going for transplant. I think in Mathurin study it was hardly about 4% of the total patients who were transplanted, and then for them they take a matched control. So I think that this is in no way bias free. There can be bias. You can never have a matched control group as good as the prospective study. My own experience, I'm sure I could not have done a control arm, so it's not possible in our practice. And all I could do was to compare them with other patients who are transplanted at the same time and try and see the outcome. So with all deficiencies, with all limitations, I mean that's the result which we have, and I am totally in agreement with your statement that this control group is a big problem, and which will continue to be like. I don't think anybody can do a blinded study in this. It's not possible.
Control group is not at all possible, especially in the private hospitals. So this may be to some extent may be possible in the government hospital, but it has to be very, very difficult.
So there are two ways control. One is a control group who has not been transplanted. Other is a matched control. So if I do 40 alcoholic hepatitis and I have 100 transplants for similar matched control who have got a similar disease profile, that I can do. That's the best I can do.
Propensity score matching can be done.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Sanjeev, the patients of alcoholic hepatitis who underwent transplant, how many had underlying cirrhosis?
See, if you ask me, when I look at the histology of these patients, actually in most patients, alcoholic hepatitis and cirrhosis, there's a combination. They have a partial nodule formation, some have full cirrhotic nodules. If you have a very pure alcoholic hepatitis without nodular formation, without bridging and all, without collapse, then these patients should not be transplanted. They will recover. Pure alcoholic hepatitis, in my opinion, if there's no cirrhosis, no actually or incomplete cirrhosis, no, like, what we call as bridging collapse and all, they should actually recover on medical therapy. They should not enter transplant. So that's one of the reasons why a transjugular biopsy, which is done, will be very useful in these patients.
In our patients, it is very, very, very rare to have a pure alcoholic hepatitis.
Agree. I totally agree with you, sir.
Because these are patients who are taking alcohol for years together, for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So they will have cirrhosis, underlying cirrhosis. And over and above, there is a alcoholic hepatitis. I'm yet to see a pure alcoholic hepatitis patient presenting like this. So this may be a very common entity in the Western countries, but in our country, in this part of the country, almost always we get ACLF.
Yes.
Underlying cirrhosis is there.
I would like to add here, sir. So in US, I have spent some time. So there I saw patients who come very, very early to their clinics. So that is why they are getting probably the alcoholic hepatitis patients very early. And here we are getting patients very delayed presentation. And they generally ignore their things. In addition to that, obesity, which Dr. Duseja mentioned, a study in Liver International just showed that it 4 times increased risk of hazard of decompensation if there is associated metabolic risk factors, in addition to the alcohol intake. So that is nothing.
Professor Sai, any comments from your side?
Sanjeev, just one question and one clarification. Have you given up this rule of 6 totally, or still following this rule of 6?
Very pertinent point, sir. We are following. In a stable patient who's cirrhotic coming to us, rule of 6 is still there. But what happens is that those who are sicker patients, we tend to like be more relaxed in them. But I would be wrong in my statement if I say that abstinence rule is not followed. It should be followed. If it's not being followed, it should be followed in all centers. And if it is 6, fine. If you can't do 6, make it 3, but you should follow that.
And just one.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Anup, go ahead.
Actually, you are associated with the most successful transplant program in our city. So you must have listed many patients. Yes, and after 6 months of abstinence, what percentage of patients were off the list?
I will answer you this in a very practical point, sir. When the patients come to us and then they're following with a hepatology medical OPD, right? And they are on follow-up. I have many patients who actually, I would say 30-40% patients who have been, coming to me and then they are still, doing very well after 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and they never got a transplant. Those who are absolutely keen, I have to go for transplant, they will, after seeing me, they'll go to surgeons straight away. And how so you tell them, they will be, like a bid for transplantation, and you cannot change them. So I have seen that patients who are actually following up in the medical OPD and they are, actually, in a good, you can say, counseling program, I think there's a significant number of them actually do stabilize, and therefore that patients and I think being a little slow in these patients is better than rushing and do a transplant.
That is my impression also, because I have many patients. Our program is not a very successful program. So many of them, in fact, if they are abstaining for long, they are off the transplant list.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree with you.
I also feel that this is the side effect of the lot of CMEs on alcoholic hepatitis. So what is happening, the notion goes very clear that any alcoholic hepatitis, MD of more than 32, send them for the transplant. This is especially the physicians, the gastroenterologists or hepatologists in Punjab are doing. The patient starts from Punjab and then they either go to Medanta or any of the hospital in Delhi, and they would like to get a transplant because the treating physician or the gastroenterologist has asked him that you need only transplant. And somehow, if they land up in PGI, because we are not running a very successful program. That is one thing. But we try to assess them. If they are stable, we don't advise for the transplant, and then wait for the recovery. And majority of these patients will recover if they are stable. If they are unstable, then there is a problem. If they are sick, in that situation, they have rightly advised them for the liver transplant. So if they are stable, wait for the 6 months, and majority, I will say, will improve. And there are innumerable number of patients who are under my follow-up for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years even. They are having cirrhosis, but they are still doing fine.
So I will again say, I don't want my lecture to give an impression that alcoholic hepatitis should have transplant. I have made it very clear. Majority actually don't need it. They should be managed medically. But the patients who come to me they are super selected patients. They are from all good centers, very sick.
I know.
So therefore they are, it's like filtered out patients, tip of the. So your statement is right, and I think I don't want to give an impression that hepatitis should be transplanted. Medical management still continues to be the backbone of these patients.
Yeah.
Sir, I would like to add one small point. Dr. Saraya asked about delisting, and there is a recent study in Journal of Hepatology where they addressed this question and specifically said that around 9% of patients with alcoholic-related cirrhosis, decompensated cirrhosis, gets delisted because of the improvement. And the lower age and the lower MELD score, higher platelet count, and the female sex, they were the predictors of the delisting. So females were likely to improve, and the lower MELD scores and the higher platelet count. So that was a very important study come up from JHEP.
But 9% is very small.
I've also gone through that study, and my impression is that the number is more than 9%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there was that.
So, Anup, you want to say anything? I think we are all done.
Yes.
And it was a very nice program. Thanks to the speakers and the audience. Thanks to Dr. Sandeep and everybody. Dr. Gurvilas, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I would like to thank everybody.
Sorry. Please go ahead. Yeah.
From our side, it is done. You want to finish it?
Well, before I start thanking, just a small comment about what you said about patients and practitioners in Punjab. I personally, having practiced in UK for almost 12 years and then having practiced in Punjab for 10 years now, I feel the patients are very well informed. The ones who actually go for transplant, they are very well informed, and they come with that mindset to a physician. And even if we tell them for a follow-up, the tertiary care for these patients remains in centers like liver transplant centers. Unfortunately, we do not have a liver transplant center in Punjab. If we could get one of such things, if we have some local expertise in this and a successful program, maybe less number of patients would go to Delhi or to Bangalore or to other places. And it is not that they go and they just want a transplant and they are given a transplant. It's just that they are sick patients also. And away from home, it's very difficult to send them back. They have this mindset that we have come for something and we want it. I felt this was one of the reasons why many of patients in Punjab just go like that. And Punjab particularly, because alcohol problem is a big problem. Professor Vrinder Singh would know that. I mean, he's worked so much on this population. So yes, you have a point there that many practitioners may be doing this, but as a gastroenterologist, as a liver specialist, we have felt that patients are well informed and they come particularly with this request. And all they ask is, where should we go? And then we just refer them for a more of a assessment. And they then they don't come to us. Then for 6 months, 8 months, they're being followed up elsewhere in Delhi. And that's how it ends up happening.
Yeah.
Great talk. Thank you so much, everyone. I should start thanking our very worthy speakers, very eloquent speakers. Thank you, Nipun. Thank you, Sanjeev. It was a lovely evening and a lovely talk from both of you. Dr. Saraya, I'm honored to know you today. Thank you so much for being with us. Professor Vrinder Singh, heard a lot about you, sir. We have never met, but I would certainly make it a point to come and see you one of these days. Thank you so much for being there with us and making this a very successful evening for GLF. I'm also very grateful to Abbott India, who has helped us arrange this. In fact, they are the ones who've done everything. The makers of Evitol, Heptral, and Creon. Thank you very much, Abbott. And I would fail my duty if I don't mention Ajay Duseja, Professor Ajay Duseja, our scientific advisor and our backbone for GLF. Thank you, Ajay. And I think we should end it there. Thank you all for a great evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very
sir.
much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.